Yesterday we had some time to swim and talk about these things. Lev had a completely different talk 2 days ago in Ljubljana in our little event there. And so I think I've wrapped my mind around your main ideas. And I'm trying to think how could we make your thinking useful to the population taking care of the European Capital of Culture here in Rijeka.
Sure.
Because as you know, because I know we spoke about it, this here affair, just like any other ECOC, is heavily documented and meant to be measured.
Yes.
In order to be analyzed.
Counted.
Yes, so we're counting legs, dividing by 2, and we have a number of participants and stuff like that.
Right. Simple counts.
Keep it simple. No, but seriously, I find the thing you have closed your thing with, quite useful.
Yes, and I can make better graphs.
You can do color better.
I can do color, but also, I mean, basically have it for every country. I mean, we created a list of like about 50 type of cultural categories. The only problem is when you start dividing the data, sometimes it gets very small. So that's why I keep it like a region level, but because then it becomes a bit unreliable, but you can see some interesting micro patterns. Right?
All right. So I'd like to see how, I can
show you maps of Europe with density, but that's basically because I just haven't made one, but the data is there. Right?
Okay, well, maybe we can dump your data and make our own graph.
Absolutely.
All right. So I'm trying to see, I understand you live in another part of the world, in another part of the whole cycle of making culture, and your job is to observe and offer suggestions for possibly inspiring suggestions for people to work with later. But do you, anyway, envision applications? This is a typical question you get asked every day.
Typical question in the
capitalist world.
Yeah, well, no, actually not. No, in America, nobody ever asks this question. Yeah, no, never. Because, because academic, right, the universities, it's its own industry, right? So people get grants to do long-term research. It's actually in Europe and in developing countries where there's more pressure for universities to connect to industry, which is very paradoxical.
Okay.
I mean, at least based on my observations being in America for like 39 years, teaching for 26 years. But when I was invited to do a very short talk at the Harvard Design School, and so of course it's all Asian students, of course we did ask about applications.
Okay.
So it's coming, yeah.
So your question to
applications,
your answer to applications is that it is a frequent question.
It's a frequent question like in Russia, for example.
Okay.
First question in Russia. And I guess now first question in Rijeka.
All right.
Welcome. No, okay, but let me answer.
Please.
Okay, so there's like applications and there are applications, right? So the first applications, you basically try to change people's mind and give them different ideas and so inspire them, and create different models. So, for example, when you count things and you have to prove somebody something, that you're good by counting, well, actually you can count things differently, right? And in fact, these counts exist. UNESCO is doing it, but maybe it didn't quite, got to EU level. So applications. So we actually envision a very pragmatic application for this project, assuming that 10 people will continue giving budgets for next year. If I find the right program, we'll make applications. So applications like this, right? So we're basically going to analyze, I think it's 4 or 5 million short descriptions of all these events over 13 years. So we're going to extract all the keywords, all the words, right? The way Google does it. And then I imagine like you have a window, you copy and paste description of your festival, of your whatever, fashion collection, whatever. And we'll say, okay, what kind of keywords we're using. I use the 93% of all cultural events in your region, but not in fashion. So the idea is to give you diagnoses, right? At least on the level of text, how unique, how popular, how typical or atypical your description. So that's basically one application, right? I mean, ideally, I would have application for students, for everybody in the cultural industry. You put in graphic design, people say, is it original or not? But this is a bit more complicated, so that's why I'm kind of working with text for now.
Yes.
Yeah, so basically to help people put their work in larger context, The first thing I do when I start teaching, all the classes I've been teaching for 26 years is basically digital art and design, hands-on, right? I don't teach theory. It's, difficult to teach theory when the graduates. The first thing I do is, okay, go to Behance, because, for example, in America, like, yeah, if you go to top school like Parsons, we know, but in my university, like, we don't know. I said, look, what you're doing is really terrible, so go to Behance. This is 2 million people who are better than you, and we don't go, because maybe we're afraid. So that's basically one way, but you can also make it more systematic. Sorry, I'm done.
I had no problem. I had a lot to do with the local version of European Capital of Culture, and I remember having all kinds of emotions, or actually only 2 types of emotions regarding exactly that approach. Do you want to write your application or later your program in order to be exactly part of the monoculture, or you are genuinely looking for your own position? And your tool, your hypothetical imaginary
hypothetical tool, which we can do. You can go program it probably.
Should stay open to the user to either desire to super comply without ever having a profile or identity.
Exactly.
Or, just a little engineering remark there.
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah.
And when I say monoculture, right? When, in the 80s, people talking about McDonald's and Hollywood. In the 90s, we talked about, like in 2000, we're talking about Zara. But this is also monoculture, right? We talk about diversity, that's high culture monoculture, right? Everybody talks about diversity, so it's important, but it's also monoculture, right? If you talk about social equality, it's monoculture, meaning you're talking about topics which are important, but we're everywhere. So it's interesting, but it's not unique. And again, I'm not saying everybody has to be unique, but I want to be unique.
Do you remember this guy, Neil Sedaka?
No.
I thought he would. We're of the same age.
Okay.
He wrote this amazing song. It was the greatest global hit in 1959. Oh, Carol, Don't Make Me Sing Now. I can play with the YouTube version. And it's a famous case in pop culture because the way that song came about was exactly through this type of approach. He bought the Billboard magazine and went through all the top 10s in the world printed at the newspaper at the time. And he realized, okay, I need to use a chick's name in the title. And then he listened to all the tracks. And then he said, I picked up all the licks, I picked up all the tempos. He deconstructed all of that material, and he came up with a song that it averages all of the perceived, let's say, regularities. And he actually did manage to come up with a hit. I'm at the edge of singing now. I won't, I promise.
So it's basically a bit like what Netflix did, where we have computers analyze all the shows, and we made this little show which basically ruined this country, which is the Games of Thrones, right? So right? Because
it's a ruin of one part of this country.
The computer didn't do it. The computer simply said, if you want to be successful, you have to use these elements. So the thing is, you still have to be a very talented person to know what to do with analysis, right?
Yeah, I'm trying to signal. At this point. Maybe noticing I'm nudging, I'm trying to signal their uses for creatives, but depending on their own position, they can either choose to comply or...
Well, the way this is used, right, by culture industry, it's used for, already 15 years or so, right, is that, they create these quotas, for example, film industry, and we use these measures, right? So it's used by culture industry, by governments, right? I mean, it is used, it's not used by individuals yet, so maybe what I want to do is make it more detailed.
Or we should just wait for Culture Snowden to come up with some internal files of Walt Disney Company, the only company that makes films nowadays, because they all seem to be, what's that word, formulaic movies, no? Are you noticing
what's going on? That's something maybe, maybe not everybody would agree, right?
Okay.
That's exactly what I'm against visualizations, right?
Okay.
I mean, I refuse to make visualizations. I actually would rather measure imperfectly. Because, have you seen all the movies? Have you counted? How do you know?
Exactly. Just the box office as a measurement is not exactly...
Well, box office, yeah, but in different countries also, right? Different.
I'd like to show you some graphs of Disney.
Okay, please.
Disney
absolutely.
occupation of the planet someday. Eh?
Do you know? Well, I think what people should watch with this is Netflix, right? And not Disney.
Did you see the genre list of Netflix, by the way?
Yes. So it's very interesting, right? So it's kind of algorithmically created genre, which changes every day. It's about 70 to 90,000 genres.
Yes.
So that's very interesting, right? And there was an article in Atlantic about it. But one of the things, I don't know how it works, right? Because basically I think there's been basically 200 great films made in the history of cinema. 100 of them on Netflix, the rest will never get there, so once you watch them, right? So I don't quite understand, people watching all these 480 films on Netflix, but that's...
The trick, I believe, with the Netflix genre tree,
Yes.
it's not necessarily meant to be useful to actual human beings.
Right.
It's useful for the recommendation engine,
Yeah.
because of the constant tweaking in order to make people click more. It's not intended to be a cultural tool. It's really a traffic driver for a web company.
Well, I think when you're talking about recommendation, again, you may have your own position. Like I find, there are a number of different concepts, how it's used, right? So basically the idea of one idea used by Amazon is from 2001. I mean, I find Amazon recommendations to be incredibly useful. I don't like Netflix. There have been a few studies of how recommendation engines influence what people see, watch, or listen to, because it's hard to get this data. I found one study in 2010, which looked at the effect of recommendation, people using recommendations on YouTube. And it said, well, algorithm changes every day, but for the day we look at the study, we have data which shows that people who, by using the recommendation engine, people watch more different subjects than if we didn't, right? But it can change every day, right? Because there's probably, people use dozens of different platforms, everyone has different recommendation engines. And again, if you really want to understand it, you kind of have to measure things like, how do you measure the cultural difference, right? It's like, how do you measure difference between people? Yes, you can rationalize it. You can say, we're going to compare you in 5 dimensions, but obvious dimensions which are relevant to you, to me, right? So the example which I like to use, right? So let's say, there's this beautiful documentary film called The September Issue, right? So it shows Anna Wintour, right? Doing this issue of Vogue a few years ago. September issue.
I think I have it on my disk.
Yeah, and basically we're trying to choose like a model photo for cover Vogue. So we have best model, best photographer, probably best Adriatic beach, and she's looking at 700 photos. And then after 3 hours, she says this one. And the thing is, she's right. And the computer just would have no idea, because if you measure these photos the way computer measures photos now, they're going to be exactly the same. Right? So I think that on some level, right, all these measurements work. On another level, when it actually comes to nuances, when it comes to the highest level of human expression, why this photo, right? Why this photo is better? Because you live a whole life. You have billions of connections and facts, right, in your head, and there is a particular, movement of a neck or particular cloud which clicks, and we don't know how it works. So the fact that actually, for me, music recommendations, right, Pandora, for me, it works quite well. But so I'm actually surprised that it works at all. And it does seem to work better for books, but the way Amazon works, right, we don't measure anything. We're simply looking how the people who are similar to you, who clicked on the books you click, and what our books we clicked. So there is, right, the way it's called collective filtering. So I think the reason Amazon works, we actually don't measure anything. We basically simply see what other people who like what you like. So it's not one thing, right? And I don't think it's good. I don't think it's quite correct to say we simply want people to click more. But basically, what we want is we want people to spend more time on the platform. So we can show ads. That is true. But and so what?
But there is economy here as well. I have to jump in with a little remark. That, the shareholders and the owners of Amazon, however altruistic and broad intellectuals and humanists they still are worried mostly about the bottom line of their company. And
after 20 years, this company start making money, sure.
Yeah, actually it does.
It's basically an art project, right?
It's not an
art project,
It's not a clean picture. That's my thing.
Sure.
You can look at the Facebook algorithm for displaying stuff in your feed.
Understand.
It is based on a lot of anthropology. It is based on a lot of genuine cultural insight and cutting-edge sociology, but as well, it has a purpose.
Absolutely. But, this is actually what I think is the real tragedy of humanity these days. Because the people who really have detailed data about culture today are companies. People who do marketing research, Amazons, etc. We know more about people's tastes, desires than any academic. But this data is only analyzed from point of view of buying behavior, right? And you know, it's the same idea. When the famous article, which started computational social science, was published in Nature in 2009, we said, okay, so now we can have these data sets, but of course, can academics, can sociologists ever compete with sociologists who work inside with Facebook, right? You know, so if I was a brave person, I would basically get a job inside Facebook, Amazon, and get hold of their data. I managed to do it with Momo, right? So Momo invited us. I sent my student. He was very nice, smiling to everybody. And then we got access to a whole Momo photo data set, you know, which I showed in Rijeka. So it's possible, yeah, it's possible.
All right.
But, you know, as a person who grew up, right, in a kind of, as a teenager in the 70s, right, Russia, kind of is declining communism, I will shock you, but I think economically, I'm definitely for capitalism. I mean, capitalism with like social support, but definitely if I have to choose, you know, as a famous playwright, right? You know, I think Ionescu said this in '49, Romanian kind of playwright who immigrated to Paris. He said, "Yeah, both capitalism and communism are two evils, but out of two evils, I choose the lesser one."
Yes.
But you pushed me. I didn't want to say it. You pushed me, right?
No, it's perfectly okay. It's just that I'm trying to reflect on the biases included in the, you know, evaluation of the business.
Okay, but the thing is, if you want me to make a detailed list how this can be used for Rijeka 2020, sure, let's go have coffee, you know.
Sure, we are going.
I will do it.
Or for Ljubljana 25, which is
or Ljubljana 25, or Mirabor 2030, or
I
don't know, or Hvar 2007. Well, no, Hvar is already lost, right? Lost to tourists, right? So.
Yeah, Hvar is gone. Maybe some mountain. All right, look, I'm seeing some hands.
I think there are some intelligent hands in the audience.
Definitely one more. So is it okay if we like slowly, gently move to that part?
I think fast.
So there's a microphone there.
Gentle.
Yeah, so first hand I saw was Marin over there, yellow, but look, Marin, let's be gentlemanly and optimize the geography. So this is for you.
So I had two questions. One is, what are we calling innovation? Because I feel like that's a little fun.
So what are we calling what?
Cultural innovation.
Cultural innovation.
Yeah, when you have that term there about there's spaces between cities, and I just was curious, like, what are the criteria of that?
Sure. So I never use this term, but this is a term which is very widely used in all this, right, kind of studies of creative cities, all the studies which try to justify culture by saying it contributes to innovation. I mean, there's a huge literature in economics, right, et cetera, et cetera. I don't do it because like there's people already doing it. I don't want to compete with them. So, you know, I am brave enough and stupid enough to say I can measure in some ways, to a certain extent, the difference between cultural objects and the level of formal content. I would never, ever try to measure cultural innovation because I think it's too hard. That doesn't mean that people haven't created interesting measures. The problem is always measures, right? Like always counting, right? How many films, you know, have been sold? How many films people watch in VHS? You know, it all comes from economics, right? So it's basically economists who said, "Oh, what else we can do? We can now basically work for UNESCO and measure culture." And of course, right? We know that economics, right, is much less important, right? We know economics is based on desire, not on rational choice. So I'm kind of trying to. I probably have to talk to them, so they don't kill me, but. I'm kind of not interested, right? This idea of kind of basically we measure culture where you measure goods, right? And this is the dominant approach. You know, there are these studies again, creative cities, cultural economy. So I think this diversity, right, diversity measurement approach is so more interesting because actually it's like much harder to define what diversity is or uniqueness is. In computer science, right, there are hundreds of millions of papers which work on images, video, etc. And in fact, people who study kind of social media images, they have proposed in the last 5 years a bunch of measures of concepts, which to us look very difficult. Interestingness, you know, Flickr has interestingness, right? That's a measure, right? How interesting is this image? Uniqueness, and so on. So it's possible to mathematically define them in relation to a particular data set, but, you know, you probably have seen more images in your life when there are images on all of Facebook. So you can measure this in relation to a particular set. So we can measure how unique is Rijeka proposal in relation to other 60 proposals. But if you look at it from point of view of normal person, a normal person walks into exhibition, right? Everybody has different cultural background, right? So you can measure all these things if you kind of put a frame around a particular data set. People use innovation, right, a lot in economics, right? And of course you can quantify it. There has been one study done by people from Rutgers who took a data set of about 60,000 kind of famous artworks from 14th century until now, and did some measurements. And then we kind of plotted, and we said this is artworks which are from point of measurements, only look inside these images, are most innovative, but actually ones which are basically in art history books, like Giotto, Picasso. So that maybe means that art history itself is very biased. We're just simply looking at visual difference, right? Anyway, sorry, but it's very interesting question, right?
Where's that microphone?
Yeah.
Throw it towards
anyway,
the guy.
but just to say, I'm very careful. Yeah, I'm very careful. So I think the innovation term, it was maybe I had to write it for the too many people. It's possible, but normally I don't measure it. Yeah.
Yeah. Hi. Thanks for an interesting lecture. My question was, you counted the number of events. Of course, it was mediated, so biased, as you said, and so on.
Sure.
But there's also a question of what kind of events they are. For example, in Croatia, in the last 10 years, we had a boom of film festivals. Right. So we used to have 2 film festivals, and then now we have 60 plus film festivals, which means great, number of film festivals going up. But at the same time, the number of small cinemas, mono cinemas, is going down because Disney is taking over, Fox, and so on and so on. So it's a question of, is it just the number of, or how can you measure quality of a certain event, not just in terms of how many legs come to the event, but also the diversity of the event, right?
Well, I think that's what I was trying to talk about for 70 minutes, right? But you can measure diversity and uniqueness, looking, for example, at things like with time covers, I did very simple measurement, which is the use of color. New York Times did this project where we measured 5 qualities of songs. From point of view of film festivals, you can measure what kind of films we have. But of course, what I also said is that I don't believe you can measure every single relevant dimension of artworks because we don't know what we are, except very, very schematic artworks, right? But to me, the biggest problem is not that it can be measured. The biggest problem is, of course, with 6 or 8 data sources we chose are incredibly partial. And even with film festivals, I found one blog of some guy. He said, I think there are 7,000 film festivals in the world, but it's just one person. And that's to me is a kind of scandal, right? There's obviously you in a way funding European cities of culture, and I wish you guys all the luck. And there's always people, right? In Brussels, nobody knows how many film festivals, nobody knows how many fashion weeks are, right? It's kind of amazing. And obviously nobody knows, what are all the millions of films done by, for example, young film students in China, which you can find on YouTube, it's 10 million films. So I hate statistics. In my book, I explain why statistics is very problematic. But when you have no idea, maybe it's not a bad way to count. So I basically try to count fashion weeks and design weeks. I asked students in Tumen, master students in media, because they wanted me to share my knowledge with them. So after 3 months, we found 70 design weeks and 50 fashion weeks. I don't think I can use it because I think we couldn't find all. So I think the only thing I can say, right? So I have to be very careful about the claim I'm making about this project, right? Sometimes I just think, Lev, just talk about it, but don't actually show anything because it's so problematic. No, but you can say there are certain English language platforms which are prestigious or important in certain countries, and there are organizations in other countries, not just in America, who want to represent themselves on these platforms for whatever reasons. right? So we want to publicize our events on these platforms. There's a particular reason why always most co-designers want to be in Behance. Is it because we're hoping to get a job? Is it because it's like, if in Behance somebody in Russia will hire? I don't know. But I think there's definitely something there, right? But it's obviously a very, very problematic terrain. And but, you know, I'm a kind of artist, right? So I'm not afraid of blank canvas. I'm going to draw something, but I can cover it with different brush strokes, right? So maybe this project will develop some methods, and then maybe these methods can be applied to like a smaller data set, which is actually more like nuance, for example.
Precisely, just wanted to make one more point. Sometimes these festivals, for example, music festivals, are exports. So they're, you know, you can have music festival or an exhibition which is going around, which is just, you know, so it seems like you have 30 exhibitions of, I don't know, Gauguin, which is, but it's actually just one exhibition.
Yeah.
So,
well, I think, so what I think is that actually, if you look at the 8 sources we used, and it was like intuition, let's see what we want to use something else, but that was possible. There was one source, like there's a difference between Behance. Behance, you can put your portfolio in Behance, but you can also put it on Tumblr, so it's not exclusive, right? One data set, which I think, one part of a data set which I think is very valid is Meetup. Yes, of course, we can go organize some event, but if you want to use Meetup platform, right? So it's a particular type of event which you can only do for one platform, so it's exclusive, right? And others are more problematic, right? For example, eFlux, right? You know, if you have probably tens of thousands of non-profit places, we don't want to spend 500 euros to advertise on eFlux to reach 200,000 people in the art world, right? You know, so I completely agree. But you know, there's also another thing which you guys don't ask me about, which, for example, which you should, because it is former Yugoslavia, or after all, there's official culture, there's an official culture, right? We meet, you know, people have exhibition in their apartment. You know, people don't want to put themselves online because we don't want to, right? You know, imagine if you analyze content, imagine if you analyze culture during the kind of communist era, don't only look at official exhibitions, right? And don't look at some as that, right? So what I want to do next year is maybe try to add another component to this project. Obviously, I can't analyze all an official culture worldwide, but somehow at least have some examples and maybe get some idea about how many unofficial events versus how many events. Is it 1% which goes to Meetup, or is it like 2%? Have some idea. Yeah. Yes.
1 second, power stick. We are recording this and it goes to Moscow, so you see. Yeah.
I'm sure it does. Actually.
Yeah.
I'm thinking about one question regarding these complex taxonomies, one of DeviantArt and the other one that was just mentioned about Netflix. And it seems, to me at least, that very complex taxonomies go with very formulaic content. So I wanted to ask if you have any thoughts about this correlation?
Absolutely. Well, so you know, again, I haven't looked at Netflix. I mean, many people say that today, like at least in the Western world, in America, it's more interesting than the cinema. But you know, I personally can't really go for Games of Thrones, just not my thing. So DeviantArt, we worked on it for 6 years, and I basically gave up. Because, you know, the thing is like this, right? So we have time covers. We all the same proportion, same size, and you can compare because you compare apples to apples. So DeviantArt, right? We get this, okay, so with 1,700 categories, you saw. You can find every possible thing, right? I mean, you can find, let's say this is all the things covered by modern art in the museum. DeviantArt this plus 10 times more, right? For installations. So it's definitely, there's nothing formulaic about it. In fact, the diversity of content, styles, and medium is so much that it just became impossible to compare, right? So that's why we look at the categories. We said there are more categories. It's much easier to compare 20th century artworks in all the art museums when compare DeviantArt. Because maybe, you know, why? But it's a different question, right? Because, you know, it's not selected by experts, right? Basically, it's a platform, you register. And what's also interesting, right? It's not like Instagram stories, right? I mean, people are people maybe on average would share maybe 15 artworks. Because it's basically we're gathered, it's very portfolio, right? So, so it's very, very diverse, And also, I mean, so I don't know so you're saying that because it's a structured platform, it's going to be less diverse?
No, I mean...
So maybe I missed your point, sorry, yeah.
Maybe it's what comes on top when you're on DeviantArt, for example, but the first impression, and it's an impression, I don't have the data, is that what comes up, what you first see or what you most see,
exactly.
is very formalized.
Yes, exactly.
So maybe
so
somewhere...
Most appreciated, right? So you see this kind of manga, fantasy illustrations, etc., etc. Well, so that's a very interesting question, right? So you notice that, I mean, millions of articles which analyze patterns in cultural content and social media by scientists, we use basically like number of likes, number of favorites. I don't, right? So there are two ways to say, okay, if you look at this as some kind of abstract system, right, it doesn't matter. We can say, okay, this image exists in the system, nobody liked it, nobody saw it, but it exists, and that's the diversity. But a different way, exactly, we say, what is the audience seeing? So the audience is seeing certain things, and the rest is long tail, which nobody is seeing. And that's obviously a very, very valid point. So then we have to look at number of likes and say, so maybe there is maybe the complexity, maybe the diversity of Behance is 100, but from point of view of the audience, seeing is only 10. That's a very valid point, and one day I should kind of, do this project, absolutely, yeah. Yeah, because that's, because again, the diversity or just what culture means, you can look from what the producers, what kind of films Hollywood produces on Netflix, or your favorite Disney studio, right? Yeah. Or what is inside the films, plot, genres, editing, females, males, robots. Or what does the audience see, what does the audience also gets out of it, right? So from that point of view, it's a kind of golden age to study cultural reception, because there are millions of forums, right, where fans discuss details of what we like, and you can actually find out how fans look at films, at fashion, at architecture. So in a way, it's a kind of cultural studies 2.0, but I don't think many people actually, I don't think many scholars are actually doing it yet, but it's amazing, right? You can actually find, like in Wikipedia, right? There are the biggest proportion of Wikipedia is, I think, like every single manga, every single comic, like every single series of every Netflix show, there's a separate page, right? So that's very interesting, right? So you can study reception. In fact, you can study reception on this big scale. And for some reason, people haven't started yet, but believe me, that's what people will be doing, smart ones. So thank you. It's a very good thing I forgot about it. Yeah.
There's one more here. Right there.
What about diversity of digital economy? Some 20 years ago, it was very often taken for granted that internet will lower the threshold and create great competitiveness in economic field. But by the end of the first decade of commercialization of internet, all we saw was just a host of digital monopolies. What's your
right? Yeah. Well, I mean, again, a very important question. I'm not an economist, but what I've read and what somebody told me, and you can tell me if it's true. In fact, if you look at internet or anything else happening today, it's not so different from cars or railroads, right? So you have, and I think it's a basic pattern, right, of maybe in the modern economies. You have a new field, new market. You have lots of small companies, and eventually it becomes a kind of monopoly. I mean, monopoly doesn't mean one. A monopoly can be 20 or 30, but not 200. And I think the 90s, right, was obviously the last utopian moment of 20th century. And obviously people thought that internet will change everything. Just as people thought, right, in the 90s, but now Cold War is over, we can invent new type of societies which are combine maybe best features of socialism and communism. Didn't quite happen. So in my case, right, I was never part of this utopian movement. I was simply looking at internet and new media the way it was, and maybe that's why my book is still relevant. And you can say, Lev, this is a major problem with your work, right? You actually don't tell us how to make society or culture better. You're just basically simply analyzing how it exists. And I completely agree. I mean, I can say in my excuse that I try to give people different ways to think about things, and maybe we'll do something with it, but I don't give people like recommendations. But I want to say one thing, right? I think you're probably right. We can look with it. But Facebook says, Facebook has Facebook, Instagram, right? There's 80 million people or companies advertising on Facebook, right? So this is like, like yoga instructors, and somebody in somebody in Iran, I don't know, selling some I don't know, shoes she bought at the factory in China, right? So I think it does enable millions and millions of like few people or one person entrepreneurs to make a living. Again, how different it is from before, I don't know. But to me, that looks kind of interesting, right? So I don't know. Maybe you have an answer for that, right? But again, it's like I'm not an economist. But the last thing I want to say, I think you would agree with me, perhaps. I have a feeling that the 90s were amazing, and we thought that 20th century horrors are over. And now, 2020, we're back to, right, monopolies, passports, visas, Cold War, right? And that's a bit disappointing. But in the same time, I still think that, especially in the countries where, where censorship, press is controlled, whether it is Iran, or even Korea, or South Korea, Northern Korea, Facebook, it has very positive. Like in Russia, all the intellectuals, all the artists on Facebook, that's where people find out about cultural events. I think it still plays a very positive role. And I would say the positivity depends on how developed and how censored the country is, right? So maybe like in countries which are more politically repressive and less developed, these platforms, I think, can play a very revolutionary role. In America, they have academic journals, right? In the 90s, I think Romania or Hungary, the whole literature was saved by internet because suddenly all the state publishing disappears and people continue to publish on internet. So to me, right, it's a very relative differential thing, right? We can always say how positive is internet, and maybe we can correlate it to like kind of other parameters of a country, if you want.
We have one more.
But yes.
Yeah. Hi. Despite the low color diversity of the spectacle framework color of both people on the stage, I would be interested in the comments by both. So it's a very general observation. Comparing this to the ecology paradigm,
yes.
Charles Darwin showed us how many species there are, and then we needed a couple of hundred years to realize that we should take care of these species, and that it's for some reason, and there's some mechanics behind it which shows that it would be good to retain them, and that this lowering of species, of obviously the natural diversity of these life organism genres should not be decreased, but that it is decreasing under the human civilization.
Just as human languages.
Quite similar, yeah. But so then in the 70s and 80s we got all of these ecological reactions that were based on hard or more and more solid data, and then we had Greenpeace, and we have WWF, the Worldwide Foundation for Nature Protection, and now we eventually have Greta Thunberg. Okay,
World Wrestling Foundation. That acronym is World Wrestling Foundation.
Yeah, wrestling for
diversity.
For diversity, obviously. But we have one even in the small Slovenia, one of its own. So they should be quite capillary. Yeah. Okay, so to my question, or to the paradox, now, I know that pandas cannot be fighting in the in the ranks of WWF. I mean, pandas themselves, and so cannot artists probably, or individual cultural producers. But what would be then the synthetic? Now, your input was analytic, but what would be the synthetic response? What would be the solutions, or are there any phenomena, any movements, any indications? Yeah, phenomena or trends? Okay, trends.
Solution to, sorry, which question?
To retain and increase, or at least retain the cultural diversity, which is obviously shown to be lesser and lesser under the same principle, which is the human civilization.
Right. Well, but you know, I get a bit nervous when I hear word obviously, right? I get a bit nervous when I hear word obviously. There's nothing obvious, and that's why I refuse with theory, which is about isms, you know, communism, psychoanalysis, or etc. You know, I'm interested in kind of ground up theory because the world is so diverse. And let's put it this way, it's actually, I think it's scientifically, quote unquote, impossible to actually say if cultural diversity is increasing or decreasing. It all depends what you look at. If you look at the kind of like music a person can access in a village X, as opposed to 20 years ago, right? You know, top 3 radio stations with incredible diversity. If you look at historically, right, the diversity of human, let's say, all the societies, customs, etc., obviously is gone. But I also think, and again, it's not my idea actually, because I kind of read some of these key articles from UNESCO, etc., yesterday in preparation. You know, people say yes. In the contemporary paradigm of, let's say, last 20, basically around 2000, 2001, UNESCO, right, passes this big resolution. The first one about, you know, cultural diversity, but we have to protect it, etc. You know, and there is not a single philosophical or scientific argument which actually proves we have to do it, right? We decided we have to do it, but, you know, there is not some kind of hard, solid justification, right? Maybe, you know, and with biological diversity, I don't know, I'm not a biologist, right? So, you know, my whole life work is against words like intuitively obvious. Because every time I look at some data set, the intuitions I have turned out to become, I rarely make discoveries, but I always find out my intuitions are wrong, you know? I would never imagine that on big hands, we're 198 countries, right? And but for some whatever reason, second city is Moscow, right? It's just not intuitive, you know. I did imagine that the growth of cultural events in Eastern Europe would be faster than Western Europe, so that was a good one. If you can figure out totally convincing argument why it's important to preserve cultural diversity, I would love to listen to it, and I would love to have this argument. But, I mean, I would love to have it. And my whole life work, right, it's about diversity of ideas, right? I basically tell to students, well, this way, but you can also think about this way. So obviously, I'm also for it, but I'm not sure it's possible to actually somehow logically prove it, but it's important, you know? You know, I mean, I know it's very kind of sad and paradoxical conclusion, and, you know, the fact that it's common sense today, that was not common sense 30 years ago, you know? And it may not be common sense 30 years from now, right?
Okay, let me put in my...
Because we may be just basically trying to found a dry piece of land or something. Right?
I'm being warned by the local friends that we should wrap up, and I'll just offer my short reply.
Because otherwise it could be too much diversity.
Exactly, way too much, way too much. Yes. There's a thing, this planet has been showing a certain level of human tolerance, or, you know, tolerance to humans, and we're going to see how long-term that can function. So this is maybe a human-tolerant planet, maybe not. And the second part of that answer is that anyway, in a couple of million years, it's going to be the cockroaches making Jurassic Park about humans. So don't think too much about long-term, because you're going to get depressed, just like with the stories of actual diversity.
And also, you know, I think basically there's a very powerful argument people make with this whole concern about, you know, what happens to humans. It's a very egoistic, human-centric concern, which is one species out of a billion. You know, so humans have only been around for 50,000 years.
So why bother?
Yeah, so it's like there's going to be other species, you know. Yeah. No, but not by bother. Of course, we want to survive, but. You know, we're very egoistical, you know.
Okay, guys, get out of my face. Lev, thank you very much for coming to this city. What's this, Saturday? So it's Rijeka. Ha, ha, ha. Cheers, guys.